Afternoon. Let's kick it off. Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us for another installment of our webinar series offered through the Stender School at the College of St. Scholastica. Hope you enjoy this one. We've got Brandon and Natalie presenting. We're going to be talking about some topics that relate to project management. If you want to dig into this stuff a little bit deeper, we do have a certificate offered through the school. It's a 12 credit cert. It's online, takes 2 semesters to complete. With this, if you hold the PMP cert or are looking to get the PMP cert or the CMP cert, the credits in this program can apply towards the EDU credits required to take that exam. Or if you're already certified, this can help you with the credits required to maintain the certification. So if that's something that you're interested in, I'll put a link to the program in the chat here. Check it out after this when you get a chance, and just let me know if you need help exploring it. But yeah, with that, I will pass it over to Brandon and Natalie.
Thank you, Joe. Hi, I'm Brandon Olson. I'm the director of our graduate certificate in project management. And we've had this program in place for about almost 10 years now. And so, I guess Joe mentioned it's a 2-semester program. We're at 4 courses, taking one at a time, and they're all online. But for today's topic, we're going to be talking about Waterfall, Agile, and hybrid methods of project management. And over the past 10 years that this program's been running, we've seen changes in project management, and Natalie's going to be talking about these changes, where we've gone from more of a traditional waterfall to having options. It's not necessarily we don't do waterfall anymore. Natalie's going to be saying the same thing, but we do have a lot of different ways we can do project management. So today's presenter is going to be Dr. Natalie Disque. Natalie's been teaching here at the college since 2005. We used to have a program in IT leadership. She was adjunct faculty in there as well, and she's been with us since the inception of our project management program. So today's, speaker is Natalie Disque, and welcome, Natalie.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Brandon, and welcome to the presentation and the webinar today. Like Brandon said, I have been with the college for a long time, actually, I think since 2005. Love project management, been working in it for a while, and so hence why I'm here, helping you guys learn about Waterfall and Agile and hybrid project management today. So we'll go ahead and get started. So the objectives of this webinar is to let you know and get a full understanding of what Waterfall project management is and its advantages and disadvantages, what Agile project management is and its advantages and disadvantages, Agile versus Waterfall and when to use one over the other, and then what is hybrid project management, why use it and when to use it, and how you can combine Agile and Waterfall project management together. And I see a chat, I'm just gonna look really quick. Okay. If there's any questions, I'll probably take them at the end because we'll have a question and answer session. I just want to make sure that wasn't anything important. All right, so let's begin. So what is Waterfall project management? Basically, Waterfall project management, it's also known as traditional project management. It's where a lot of people use project management because it's very linear. It's a sequential process of managing projects. It's got to focus on detailed planning and strict control and sequential phases for development. So Waterfall project management, it consists of breaking down project activities into a very linear and sequential phase. And basically, it's a big picture and a top-down approach to project management. So as you can see from the screen, it looks like a ladder, right? It's like a little waterfall that spills into the other. How this works in this project management is the leader determines the goal and then kind of works backwards to plot all the steps to achieve it. I do this personally as well. When I'm giving a budget or a timeline, I start with that, and then I break it down into all the tasks that have to get done and what their costs are to come up with each of the tasks broken down, but it all kind of spills into one another. And the budget and the timeline are set from the start, and the success of a waterfall project is measured by how well the team stays on the preset course and whether or not it fulfills the criteria that's outlined in the contract for the project. So each phase of a waterfall project management process is reliant on the deliverables from the previous phase, hence why it's a waterfall. It's used a lot in engineering and software development projects because it's a very structured approach and the process falls in one direction like a waterfall. from the very beginning planning all the way through to the launch or deployment or implementation, whatever word that the company uses. And waterfall plans, usually they're built in a Gantt chart, and that's what this diagram, it's kind of from a Gantt chart showing it out. So the waterfall approach, it involves a lot of research and decision-making prior to executing anything in the project. Everything is documented in advance. So you'll know the user interface, you'll know the user stories, the feature variations, and all the outcomes. You'll know all that before the project even begins. So by doing all this work up front ahead of time, the estimating tends to be very accurate for these types of projects, and that leads to a very firm deadline. So, however, there are things that can change in a project, and I'm sure you realize that, and that becomes very difficult in changing things and revising the course of action in a waterfall project, hence where Agile comes in, which we'll discuss shortly. Whoops, sorry about that. So there are advantages of waterfall, as you can see here. Before the next phase of development, each phase is completed. So you've completed everything, you move on to the next stage. It is really good and suited for smaller projects where the requirements are very well defined. They should perform quality assurance tests and validate everything before going to the next step. So as you go to the next step of the project, you know, yep, that's been done, it's been tested, we can move on, it's a little checkbox checked off. It has very elaborate documentation because it's done at each phase, and it's done very thorough in the project. It's also completely dependent on the project teams with minimal client intervention. And any changes in the software that's made during the process is done during the process of the development, and then that's it. There's no more changes, which leads to the disadvantages. So disadvantages of waterfall is that if there's any errors that occur, they can't be fixed. I mean, they can be fixed at the end, but it costs a lot more and there's a lot of rework. So it's generally fixed during the phase if they're caught on time. It's not desirable for very complex projects where the requirements are changing. Testing periods come quite late in the development process because you're going in order and you get to the end of development and then you test. You're basically developing everything and then you test and then you implement. The documentation occupies a lot of time for the resources because it is very thorough and done up front. And the clients value the feedback. They can't get the feedback to you until everything's done at the end. So that's kind of a disadvantage. And small changes and errors that arise along the way, I mean, that could be a problem in a waterfall project management approach. So let's talk about Agile project management. So Agile project management, a lot of people call it a methodology, but it is truly a mindset. Basically, what you're doing is you're prioritizing your flexibility and continuous feedback in an iterative development. So instead of waterfall, one stage is completed and you go to the next, this is going to be cyclical. It's going to go continue and be iterative. It's really good and suited for developers and engineers where the requirements to the solutions are going to change over time. Agile is a very iterative approach to project management where it's an autonomous way of doing things. They use self-motivated team members that produce work in smaller batches. So instead of producing everything at once and then delivering it at the end, there's a lot of smaller deliverables that are done through Agile. And it's got a collaborative approach that means that all the stakeholders will be communicating with the development team throughout the project. So they get to see ongoing process and progress, and the changes can be made within that instead of waiting to the very end. So the reasons why the solutions change, because we have projects and sometimes there's changes, is the feedback is given from the stakeholder at that point of the project, and then the development team will actually look at it, reflect on it, and say, okay, we need to make that, and they create the work for making that change in addition to what else is going to be done in the project. So success for an Agile project is measured by the team's ability to maintain a continuous pace of work from one iteration to the next by incorporating the feedback from the client. So Agile software development is extremely iterative and adaptive and allows for quite a bit of flexibility, and it's in for resource management, for task management, and even project planning. So it incorporates flexibility on all different levels. Since the team reflects and then pivots at the end of each sprint, instead of at the end of the whole project, the Agile team really can only look like 4 to 6 weeks ahead. They can't just plan out the whole project because they may have changes in between and they want to make the change and give it for feedback. So it doesn't work around a fixed timeline like the waterfall project does. And an Agile project can't have a budget at the beginning of the project and the method permits for changes of the deliverables even late in the development process. So best practices for managing agile projects is you have the iterative development where you're consistently developing, giving it out for feedback, starting again, making changes or continuing on to the next step. You have daily meetings. You will definitely meet with your team as well as the stakeholders to get any kind of feedback needed for the actual deliverables in that sprint. And then the use of professional tools such as Microsoft Project. And you'll use Project for pretty much a lot of different kind of projects, but Agile projects, it's great for. So as you can tell, there's going to be a lot of advantages to Agile. But just to quickly note, I wanted to make sure that you guys are aware, there is something called the Agile Manifesto. And it seems like it's a technical term, but it really isn't. This is where Agile project management actually came from. Back in 2001, there was a group of 17 software engineers who met in, I think it was Utah. They got together because they kept thinking that Waterfall was so restrictive and it just deemed really heavy on project management. So they decided to create a set of 4 basic values to be a little bit more flexible, which is the Agile Manifesto. And the 4 values that are listed here is part of that. There's also, I think, like 12 principles as well, but we're not going to get into that. Just want to let you know kind of where Agile came from. This isn't just, somebody thought, I'm not doing Waterfall anymore. We're just going to do that. But there are advantages, and there's lots of them. For Agile, it's more rapid development for solutions. You reduce a lot of waste and minimize the resources because you're continually on the iteration, developing, getting feedback, continuing on. Increases a lot of flexibility, and it's very adaptable to change. Increases success because as you do a smaller deliverable, you get the feedback right away if it's correct or not, and if that's what the stakeholder or customer is looking for. And if not, you can make a change and change it right away, as opposed to Waterfall, where you have to wait until the end of the project and say, oh, here's a deliverable. Oh, we have to go back and change that now. There's a lot of rework. There's faster turnaround times because you're chunking down the deliverables into smaller sprints, and there's faster detection of issues. In addition, you're optimizing the development process. It's a very much lighter weight framework than the Waterfall. You're optimizing the project control, increased focus on specific customer needs because they're telling you their feedback, and increased frequency of collaboration and feedback. Now, I'm not going to say that Agile is the solution for everything because there are definitely times where you use Agile and times where you don't. So there are some disadvantages. In Agile, it is difficult to assess the effort required at the beginning because there could be several changes from the beginning all the way to the end. There is a lack of emphasis on necessary designing and documentation, unlike Waterfall, where you do a ton of documentation, especially at front. Agile is so flexible and it's moving so quickly, it tends to slip and a lot of documentation isn't done, which is easy because you can move along to the deliverable, but later on, if you have to go back and look, somebody has to do some kind of documentation. It can easily be taken off track because the requirements are unclear or there's changes that are changing the scope and the deliverables along the way. And only the senior programmers make the decisions. So that could be adherence as well. All right, so in a visual here for Agile versus Waterfall, as you can see from the description I was saying, in Waterfall, you have each phase that leads into the next. You can't go to the next phase of the project until the previous one is completed. So it's very linear. And in Agile, you have the same actual processes of the project, but as you can see, after you analyze and plan, the design and build and test can be iterative because you could be doing that and then you deploy and then you go to the next part. So it's very iterative, and this is a visual of the two in comparison. And I'll have a table later on for you with additional stuff too. So that leads us to the actual differences between Agile and Waterfall or traditional. In Agile, the planning, you do each sprint. The phases are broken down into sprints, which is small deliverable times of usually 2 to 4 weeks. Sometimes you do 6. I've seen mostly 2 to 4. Changes occur often and they're welcome because you want the feedback. You want to make the changes that the customer is going to be happy with. So the end result is exactly what they're looking for. Each deliverable is a working product. When you're actually making the changes in your sprint and you're delivering it out, it is a complete product. So for instance, an example would be like a website. You have many different layers of a website. You will have like a homepage, you'll have the contact us page, you'll have the products or services, you may have some other areas too. And so if you were building out a website, instead of waiting and do everything at once and then just releasing the whole site, which would be Waterfall, you can say, okay, we're going to build the landing page and the about us page first and deliver it out. Nothing else is there and functioning, just that. And then the feedback from the customer say, yep, that's right. Or the logo is over here, move this here, change this color. And in the meantime, then you go to the next page and say, okay, now we're going to do the contact us page. And then you deliver that. So it's a little piece at a time, but you're getting a deliverable as an end result very quickly. It's a working product. And the communication for Agile is smaller and self-organized teams. So there's a lot of collaboration and communication going on. In traditional and Waterfall, the planning is done for the whole entire project upfront. The phases are approached for the each of the phases are for the whole project, not an iteration of what's being delivered at a time. It's the whole thing at the end. Changes can completely derail the scope of Waterfall project. It could basically add additional time and cost and resources if there's a change somewhere. It'll put like a grinding halt if you're in the middle of development and they're like, nope, we have to have this change and it has to go in now before you go to the end result. It's crazy. The deliverable is just the final project at the end, and it's all the work together. And the communication could be poor because there's a large amount of resources that work in a Waterfall project. So now let's talk about hybrid project management. So according to the PMI, this is their definition, but basically hybrid project management is essentially a combination of Agile and Waterfall project methodologies together. So hybrid project management aims to balance the strengths of the two approaches by combining the rigor structure of the traditional Waterfall project management and the flexibility and responsiveness of Agile project management. This allows for the project teams to adapt to changing circumstances and requirements, but still ensure that the project is deliverable on time, within a budget, and to a high quality standard. So ultimately, the key success of a hybrid project would be to select the right combination of both methodologies and techniques to fit the specific need to the project. So you may think, well, what could we use hybrid project management for? Like what kind of projects? What I've seen is there's two cases. The project consists of a typical like a hardware and a software component that have to be done. Then they're pretty equal, where the hardware component is Waterfall and the software component is the deliverable in Agile. Or you can have a product that is a software piece with a back end and a front end. That would be a really good use for a project for a hybrid. So this is a visual for you for hybrid. As you can see, it's still got the same phases of a project, but you have the Waterfall stuff up front when you do all the initial planning. And then when you get to the design, build, test, this is the Agile, and you keep kind of circling around, delivering until you get it all out. So maybe now you're asking, what are the reasons of why I would use a hybrid? There are many reasons. As you can see here, it does shorten the design, analysis, and planning, and it lets you define the project frames, including the budget and the time of delivery. You can maintain compliance with the standards. You can enhance your collaboration that Agile has that Waterfall really doesn't. And when you adopt Agile culture, a hybrid could be a first step to helping out any kind of issues that come along. So when to use hybrid? Well, I gave you a couple of examples from real world that I've known, but everything really does depend on the following aspects on the slide. So first, is it possible to define high-level project phases and their goals? Can you choose the way that you work freely? Do you have people that are well experienced in Agile? That's important. Can you agree with project requester that only a high-level plan will be present and detailed work will not be included in the contract? Because if you remember, Waterfall, you have all the details up front, and for Agile, you don't. It's very flexible. And is the rest of the project team experienced in Agile? And what that basically means is, do they have experience in prioritizing a backlog of items, planning short sprints, estimating user stories and story points, and retrospecting? So if you've answered yes to all 5 of these, then you do have the potential to run a project in a hybrid way. But if not, then you should try to perform some necessary actions to make the majority of these points yes before starting the project. But having knowledge is not necessarily enough, especially when combining the techniques and methodologies of Waterfall and Agile. You need well-seasoned people who can steer the process and the project, both on the good and the bad parts of the project itself. Because you'll have some good days and bad days where scope will be changed and things will get derailed. So how you would combine Agile and Waterfall, you would take Waterfall and use it for the planning part of a project. So you would approach from a high level for deadlines and deliverables and the contracts with the customers. So you would agree on all the top level things that have to be done as the final deliverable, different milestones. They may say, okay, I need this at the end and I want quarterly updates. And in those quarterly updates, these are the milestones I want you to hit. That would be a great way to use Waterfall. And then you can identify the phases of the project where Agile can come in, which is usually the developing and the testing phases. And then the rule here is if the phase duration is longer than a month, it may be worth, is no longer than a month. I have to correct that. It's worth using Agile. Otherwise, go for Waterfall. Now, when you combine Agile and Waterfall, while you're using Waterfall for the planning phase, you would use Agile for the execution. So how you would do this is once you've broken down the different milestones and the tasks that you have to create, you identify each of the work types by less than a day. Because in Agile, the teams usually meet daily to see what they did yesterday, what they're going to work on today, and what the roadblocks were potentially in stopping them to do their work for that day. You create a prioritized work backlog, which basically just means that if you have 10 things to do, you can only work on 1 or 2 things at a time, or assign out the different tasks to the developers. And you may not have enough developers to do all the work in the first iteration. So you would create a backlog and you prioritize it and just say, these 2 things absolutely have to go first. So that's a priority. We're going to move them into this iteration. The other stuff we're going to put on the backlog, which means you're not forgetting about it. It's just that'll be in another iteration, and you prioritize it when you come back to the next iteration of which ones you want to do. You agree on the work in the iterations and sprints, and if they're going to be 2 weeks, 4 weeks, however long, you prioritize them. You estimate how long it's going to take for each task, because sometimes a task could have a higher priority, but it also could take longer. And you might have the opposite too. You could have 6 tasks that will take less than a day. So they may not be a high priority, but maybe you just want to knock them off the list, so you're at least delivering something to the client. And in the end of each sprint, you would do a retrospective and look at, again, what you did, what went wrong, what you can learn from, and create a lessons learned for future projects. And you use captured completion metrics to adjust for next sprints. So you look at what went wrong or what took too long, or maybe somebody's skills weren't up to par. So maybe match them with somebody who's advanced skills in that area that can help move the cart along to the next section. So this last slide here is pretty much Waterfall, Agile, and Hybrid, the project management, how they break down, how they compare. I'm not going to read through all of these, but I'll leave this screen up so that you guys can read through it. But just know that there are tools for hybrid as well. Like I mentioned earlier, that you can use Microsoft Project. I know some companies that don't have the resources to buy Project or anything, especially different licenses, so they just use Excel. But a lot of people will have different metrics that they will run in their sprints and iterations. They'll use like different velocity metrics. They'll do burn down charts for their resources. They'll use Gantt charts and obviously backlogs. So you can use like a Kanban board. So those are the different tools that you would use for Waterfall, for Agile, and for Hybrid altogether. And that's all that I really have for today. So I don't know if we want to open up the question and answer session.
Yeah, I guess we have enough people in here. So how about if you have a question, go ahead and add it to the chat, and Natalie can respond to those. I guess
I think it'll pop up. I think the chat will pop up on the top here. Yeah, there we go.
Yes. So while we're waiting there, I guess
to the side.
While we're waiting for some questions, Natalie, how about I'll start off with one for you. So Agile seems to be kind of the latest thing to do. What are some type of projects where you would want to avoid the Agile? That Agile is just not going to work for that project.
Yeah, so it's funny. Agile has been around for quite a long time, and I have seen where companies are saying, "Oh, it's the new buzzword. We need to use it," and they don't really understand it's a mindset. It's not something like a strict thing you have to follow. So Agile is really good when you have a shorter term project, something where you have to get things delivered quicker. It is not something that's a 2-year project where you have to know all the requirements up front. If you have a stakeholder who is constantly changing their mind, or they need to see the visual first before they say, yes, go ahead and put that into production, that's a perfect example of when to use Agile. It's really about flexibility. And it's also about churning the development out fast to get feedback to make sure what you're doing is right. Because it's like writing a paper. You can start a 50-page paper and write it and hands it in and say, hope I did it right, because that would be Waterfall. Here it is at the end, here's your end result. Or you can say, as I do every 10 pages, I'm going to send this into my instructor and get some feedback and make sure I'm on the right path and say, oh, I went the wrong direction. I need to change it before you mess up the rest of the paper, right? That would be an Agile. All right, see.
So I guess I've got a couple of follow-up questions. We'll get to these questions as well. So for example, I'm working with a client, different organization that's doing implementing an ERP, enterprise resource planning package, this 2-year project, and that has to be planned out. And there's not bits and pieces of work. It seems like package implementations, are they harder to apply Agile and a bit better for the waterfall method? What's your experience?
So for a big project like that, I would say the initial planning stages definitely do waterfall. But then when you get to the actual developing and testing, you can change it to Agile. So you actually can work on a system like that. You definitely can use for hybrid. But all the planning, since that seems like something that would have like the hospital or government, whoever agency it is for that it's for, would need to know like, okay, we have this amount of cost to allocate and you can't go over. And we have to have this implemented by this date. So that's not going to move. So that's waterfall, right? But that's fine. Do the documentation, do the planning, everything up front. And then when it gets down to here is your 57 tasks that you have to do for this, that's when you look to your engineers and you look, are they skilled? Are they really skilled in these development? If so, Agile would be great because they know what they're doing. They can move through these tasks really quickly. And then you can break down, first prioritize them, which ones have to get done absolutely first. And second is break them down into specific tasks and then assign them out to the engineers to work on them and then get some feedback before the whole system goes live at the end. Because I mean, for an ERP system, you definitely don't want to make sure that you deliver something and they say, no, that's not what we needed to do, especially with the costs involved and the amount of resources.
Okay, good. So John was asking about the PowerPoint recording being available, and Eric responded back that the email, watch your email, they'll be distributing the recorded session here. And then Maria has a question. Is Scrum included in hybrid project management?
So it can be. Scrum is part of Agile, and Agile and Waterfall together would make a hybrid. So yes, the only difference really would be that they would, well, there isn't really much of a difference when you incorporate Agile into a hybrid approach for project management. The Scrum entails having daily Scrum meetings. In Agile, we do the same thing. Scrum gets a little bit more, particular about it, but yeah, the meetings, it's called a stand-up meeting because the meeting is only supposed to be 15 minutes or less so that you can stand up and not be uncomfortable. And what you would do is you would meet with your entire team, and it puts the responsibility on each person in that meeting to go around, and everybody should be talking one person at a time. They describe, this is what I worked on yesterday. This is what I'm working on today. These are the roadblocks that I'm coming up with. And they take responsibility for what they're working on and what they're doing and where they're going with it. And if they have questions and issues, they should be bringing it up in that meeting so that the rest of the team can collaborate and say, oh, I've done that before. Let me help you with that today. And it's big collaboration. It's great. So you have these teams that they work well together, and Scrum would be starting off with your daily Scrum meetings. And then you're breaking down each of these deliverables into 2 or 4 week sprints, but on a daily basis. Everybody on the team knows who's working on what and what's getting done. So when it gets done, I've seen a lot of this on actual Kanban boards where they're taking the card and they're moving it to a done column, and whatever is done on, say, that Friday of the second week, when that sprint is done, everything in that column, that's what gets delivered. So Scrum is very, very, into the details that way. But Scrum is part of Agile, and Agile obviously is part of the hybrid.
Okay. Next question. Hunter was asking, how long do you traditionally see allocated for discovery in Agile projects?
You know what? I think it depends on the industry and the project and how big it is. I've seen, I don't know, a short amount of time, like a month. And then I've seen where they think it's going to take a month and it takes like 6. Because I think as they start getting into the nitty gritty of this is what we want the project to do, and they're still in discovery of trying to figure out what they want it to do, they'll get feedback from everybody who's involved, and then feedback from the people who are really going to use it, right? So there's a difference sometimes. Sometimes the stakeholders are the owners or the higher level managers of the corporation and say, we need to have a system that does this. And then when you ask the users, you're like, well, that's great. I do want a system, but it should have this, this, and this. Like it should report this metrics and it should tell us this, and we should have this functionality. And the people higher up didn't even think about that. So sometimes that discovery phase can last a little bit longer than anticipated, but if the right resources are in the meetings for the discovery, then it shouldn't be that long.
That's helpful. Ethan was asking a question. Are there fields that follow a uniform project structure, or do groups evaluate the structure depending on an independent project?
I'm assuming you mean fields like industries. So I think that,
Yes.
okay. So what I've seen in IT, I've seen both Waterfall and Agile. And then I've seen some that do incorporate the hybrid because of like a hardware and a software end to the project. In different fields, I've done financial and I've done some lab, and they traditionally do Waterfall because a lot of the time the company or the senior people who are signing off and doing the approving of the projects and the budgets want to see everything outlined, exactly what's going to get done, and then here's the final project. They don't want to stop midway every month or a couple of weeks and look at something. So yes, that's within the requirement. Yeah, you don't have to have me look at it each time. So it starts to get like bogging them down in Agile. So it is more traditional Waterfall, and most companies I know do Waterfall.
And I've with the classes that I teach, what I've seen, we work with some clients, and it seems like our web development project. So if we're building a website, that's perfect for Agile because the iterative nature and all the revisions. But it seems like if it depends on what's going to be important to the organization. If the budget is important, then Agile seems to be problematic because it's difficult to manage the resource budget for a project. While I guess if the scope is also kind of important, then Agile you can't manage the scope and schedule at the same time because you're going to be just iterating until you've done enough scope to be done. So there seems to be some compromise you have to make if you're going to follow an Agile method.
It's interesting you said that, Brandon. I have seen some IT projects, software development projects that do really well with Agile with the budget not actually going over, but the reasons why is because they are limited to, like, say they're consultants and they're getting paid by the hour. Okay, it's not a fixed price, it's by the hour. That could easily overrun because they can just work until the stuff gets done the way it's supposed to get done. But if there is a limit, which I've seen, where the consultant said, okay, at your whatever dollar per hour that you make, you can't work more than 20 hours this week on this. And and usually that only happens if they're highly skilled and they've done these projects before. So they know, yeah, there is no question it's not going to take 20 hours, let alone somebody who may be newer, who you're not sure if it's going to take 40 or 50. So I have seen it actually work where the cost doesn't go over, but it's pretty strict in where they have to be very skilled and know that they're limited to certain hours because they're getting billed, and then it won't go over the budget.
Sure. I guess similarly, we can just say, hey, we're going to just do 5 sprints, again, using the Scrum Agile method. We're going to do 5 sprints, and we'll get whatever scope we can get done in those 5 sprints. We can control the budget then, we control the schedule. It's going to be the scope that's going to be flexible. Okay, good. Another question regarding the stand-ups. Hunter was asking, is 15 minutes the gold standard for daily stand-ups? And what if you have a large project that may be hard to cover everything in 15 minutes?
So that's a great question, actually. Yeah, it is standard 15 minutes. Again, it's really a time that you're standing and you're not going to, people are going to start leaning against the wall in chairs because you don't want them to sit down, because if you sit down, it could go on for hours. So generally the standard is 15 minutes. I did work on a Scrum team once that there was probably 15 to 20 people, and they had to go around. And I was like, please just keep this to a minute or 2 each, because this is going to take a while. And there were a couple times where the daily Scrum went about 25 or 30 minutes and we started leaning because there was somebody who, when they said, this is what I was working on yesterday, but I came up with this issue. I was going to work on this today, but I need help with whatever. And then people started chiming in. So generally it is 15 minutes, but it could go longer with larger teams. And it also depends. It could be a small team of 4 people, but it could go over as well, because if there are issues or there's not a knowledge base to pull from and they have to start digging for resources to get the information from, there's a nice discussion, but it is a great collaboration where everybody in the team knows everything that's going on a daily basis. It's not, hey, what's going on with that over there that you're working on? Oh, I don't know. I haven't checked with you in 2 weeks. Like that's not what's going to happen in Agile. Everybody knows what's going on. And if there's issues, it's also great that everybody knows the issues, because if it hasn't been resolved in like a day or 2, then it can get escalated up and everybody is aware of what's going on. And so the setting the expectation and awareness is a really, really good thing, no matter what size team you're on.
And it seems to me if it's going beyond 15 minutes, really that should be placed into a separate meeting. Since this is just supposed to be just daily updates. What's done? What are you working on? What type of issues you're running into? In-depth discussions really should lead to another meeting.
And that's actually what I've seen. I've seen where somebody starts a discussion and a good scrum master, who is the leader, will step in and say, you know what, let's take this offline. You guys schedule that. Let's move on to the next person. And it's duly noted. And that team member with any other person that was going to collaborate with them will schedule a meeting for a half hour, 2 hours, whatever, and actually like hash it out.
So Natalie, with Agile, I'm using maybe a Scrum as an example. So we have 2-week sprints, let's say.
Yep.
So what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out then how much work can you do within that 2 weeks. So that really relies on the project team to figure the scope of that sprint. How do the project team members figure out what all that they can accomplish in those 2 weeks?
So there are different scenarios that I've seen. There are teams where they are not familiar with the terminology of Agile and Scrum, and that just off the top of their head, they know that they're skilled in a certain area and they know, oh, I've done this before. It shouldn't take me longer than a day or 2 days or a week. And you go by their skill level. There are other teams I worked on that have been working in Scrum for a long time, and they'll tell you something about a story point. Now, a story point is usually like a 1 to 5. It's kind of not necessarily your skill level, but how difficult the task is. So it could be something that's super easy, like a 1, but the time it's going to take to do that task could be 3 days. Or you can get something that's a 4 or 5, which is super hard. And that could be for a number of reasons. It could be they don't have the skills to do it, or they've never done it before, or it's not that complicated of a task, but it's dependent on something else. Like, for instance, in order to do that change in that task, they have to do it on a server, which they don't have access to, or they need access to, or they have to do it after business hours. So it complicates it. So they'll use story points on each of the different tasks that have to be done in a sprint. And depending on the number of story points, they'll assign story points to a sprint. So each sprint, they may say, we're only going to do 10 story points each sprint, and it's going to take this many sprints to do. And then they look at all the tasks and say, this is a 1, this is a 3, this is a 5, these all are 1s. And then they can move over, okay, you're going to assign this one, and they'll take those story points, move it into the sprint. And if it equals more than 20, then they'll, nope, we can't do it. We have to move it to the next sprint. Which one's a priority now? And so I've seen it really where they are very knowledgeable in Scrum, and they know the story points, and they know how to estimate really well with their knowledge and how long it's going to take. So it really varies on the team and their skill level. And if they're fairly new to project management, they'll, like I said, logically to say, well, it should only take me like a day or 4 hours or whatever. And you just kind of go with that.
Okay. And what's the sprint velocity?
Oh, that is how much you actually can, well, kind of like what I was explaining about like the 20. It depends on how much work can get done on the resource timing and like the points and stuff that are associated with it. And that's the velocity. You can't go over it. It's like saying, okay, we need 26 hours of work and that person can do it. Well, there's only 24 hours in a day. So you have to figure out, what your max is that you can do per person, how many hours a day. And that's a little complicated too, when it comes down to planning and resources. Sometimes they get allocated And people forget that there's not 7 days in a week, 8 hours a day that everybody's working. You have to do it by business day. Maybe they're off on PTO, maybe it's a holiday, so you have to really look at what you have available to you, and realistic hours of the day. And that's another thing with Agile. You don't want to plan too much, because in 1 week, you may have a couple of developers to say, we can totally get this done. We're going to work 50 hours this week, but it's going to get done on time, in budget. That's great, but that's not sustainable. You're not going to want to do that every week. And so when you're estimating out everything, velocity, timing, everything, you're not going to say, oh, well, they did it this week, so we're going to do it on every sprint. No, that's not how you should do it.
For story points, for estimating work, so you're like a range of 1 to 5. I've heard 1 to 10, or so you can numerically do that. What I typically do with my undergraduate students who are new to this, new to estimating, they don't have that experience. We use T-shirt sizes. Is that also another common? Okay. So
yep, I've seen that too. Small, medium, large. Yeah.
So that if you don't know exactly, you can take a more qualitative approach to figure out how many, the relative size of your sprint based on those T-shirt size stories.
Yep, and I'm sure that if from the 8-week semesters, I'm sure you've seen that at the beginning, they're all like, oh, this is a large, this is huge. And then by about week 6, they're like, oh, it's a small, maybe a medium, the same exact task. So the more skilled and knowledgeable they get, then the less severe the actual task becomes.
Gotcha. Okay. And as I'm asking Natalie questions, feel free to continue to post questions to the chat. I'm just partially filling time and diving into some of these topics that I think we can cover a little bit. There's some other details here. So another thing you had mentioned several times was a Kanban board. Could you explain what a Kanban board is?
Yeah, so it is a tool that you can use. There's different tools actually out there. One of the ones that I have in the class that I'm teaching here at College Science Class is Trello. You can use different ones, but the easiest way for a non-skilled Scrum type of project management team to work in Agile is to use a Kanban board, which is a visual of cards. And you will have different columns for each one. So just like you were thinking, just like you would think in terms of what has to get done. So this has to get done in this column. Then it's currently being worked on, and maybe there's some issues and it's done. So you have a different column for each one. So let's think of, I'll give the simple example of the website with just a couple small functionalities, not all the crazy ones that are out there now, but you'd have a landing page, you'd have a contact us page, you'd have about us page, and then whatever you're selling, your products or services page, right? So let's just say there's 4. So that would be 4 different cards in the to-do column. And then each of those cards could get broken down because, contact us could be a bunch of different, or service and products, it could be a lot of different things in there. But you would take that and say, all right, Joe is going to work on the landing page. It's going to be pretty simple. It's going to have the logo, a picture of our current headquarters, and a little blurb of what we do. That's a pretty simple one, small amount of story points. And if they don't even know story points, that's fine. Say, I'm going to take that card and I'm going to work on it. So Joe moves it from to do, assigns it to himself, and moves it over to working on column. And it sits there. So the whole team has a visual, and it's like Post-it notes almost, that you like moving over to columns and say, oh, I was going to take that one. Joe's got it. Okay, cool. Somebody's working on it. I'll go to the next one. And so, by looking in there that Joe is working on that. It's in the, currently being worked on column. And then if he has any questions, he may assign that card or pull members in and add them to that card so that they can see the card, see any comments, provide feedback. And he may say, hey, I have a question on this. I've got the logo. Does it need to go in the top left? Does it need to be the background? Does it need to go in the center? I don't know, but I've got everything written out for the page. So he may include a member who would know that, a stakeholder who can answer that for him. So he could put that into like a questions column or leave it in currently being worked on and pull a member in, and they'll get a little notification saying, you've been added to this card. They would look and say, oh, it should be in the top left corner. They write those comments, add it to the card. And all of this is a discussion thread that's stays on the card. So everybody who goes into that card can see everything that's going on. And then Joe knows what to do, says, okay, great. He moves the logo to the top left. He says, I'm done, takes the card, moves it over to the done column. So when the project team says, okay, we're going to go to our next sprint is going to be next Wednesday evening. Let's see everything that's done by Friday so we can prepare and get everything ready. And on Friday, they say, oh, Joe's got the landing page done because the card on the Kanban board is moved over to done. And so they said, yep, that one's going to be delivered and deployed. And that's what's in the sprint, everything in that column. Nothing that's currently being worked on, nothing in the backlog, which is the to-do column. But that's how they would do it. Very, very broken down to like the nth level here is very easy. You have your to-dos, you have your working on, if there's any questions or issues, and then it's a done column, just so you know, and that done column could be, to ready to deploy kind of thing. So, that goes in the next sprint, or it could have a sprint assigned to it. But a Trello board is a great visual for people to be able to monitor the progress of the project, because you can go in and look at all the cards right in front of you on columns.
And for those of you that are Office 365 shops, Microsoft Planner is another visual form. It's another visual Kanban board that you can try out there.
And Jira is also a good one.
Mhm.
I'll put that in the chat so that you guys know. I don't remember who makes Jira. Is it Lassen or something?
Yes.
I forgot. Yeah.
So when, as for, again, sticking with Agile and perhaps Scrum, you've got a product backlog in Scrum. So this is kind of your scope. You've broken that down into individual products, work products.
Mhm.
How do you, at some point, you need to define what that work product is. Do you do all that work up front as you add it to your product backlog? Or do you define those work products as you include them into your sprint?
I have seen both. It's interesting. Some people do things right and some people don't. I have actually seen both, where the first thing in regards to, like, it's kind of like a hybrid, but all the stuff that's going to be in the backlog, it's like it just comes in, and sometimes it doesn't have all the information on it. And sometimes it's like we need a logo. Well, that's great. You want to give me some more information? So we have to put down all the information on there. And so that could be, well, this is deemed a higher priority because the logo should be on every page of the website. But we don't know if it's blue color, red color, whatever the font is supposed to be. So we need to find out, but the requirements aren't there and the information. So somebody has to go find it out because they know it has to be in the sprint. Like, I've seen that happen. Other times, which should be right, is where it's all broken down into user stories with all the information and then put into the backlog. So when the team goes to look at the backlog and they look at the card, they get all the information in front of them and can estimate out, yes, we can get this done in this sprint and moving forward. But I've seen it done both ways.
Well, yeah. And for Waterfall, why, do organizations use Waterfall less frequently, or are they rather intelligent in saying it depends on which project we're going to be doing? Or do some organizations just typically have smaller projects and so the Agile methods seem to work better?
I've worked on a lot of bigger projects where Waterfall is mainly used.
Mhm.
And there are times that I'm thinking to myself, there's a couple processes in here that can be done simultaneously. So, no, and then I also think, why are we waiting until the end to get the feedback when we should be asking somewhere in between? Because that's a long ways from now, and that's going to cause a lot of rework if something is not right. I've seen a lot of Waterfall being used. I think, like I said, I've seen bigger companies that have bigger projects that are like, oh, we should do Agile. And I'm like, do you even know what that means? Like, how are you going to fit Agile? They're like, a round peg in a square hole. That's not working. So it's again, it's like a buzzword. They don't really understand it. And so when you explain it to them, say, you can definitely use Agile, but this is what you'd have to change. And then they figure out if they're comfortable with, not doing one thing after the next. Like, we have to have sign off to go to this phase, and we can't do that phase until we finish it. Okay, well, then that's not going to be Agile. It's going to be, we're going to be working simultaneously iterative. If there's a change, we're going to just make it on the fly. Like, and some people aren't comfortable with that because they want to know a very structured approach of, this is my timeline, this is going to get done, and this is the cost that I have associated with it. And Agile, sometimes it's we're flying by the seat of our pants and we got to love the chaos kind of, role.
Yeah. I think over time too, as Agile has been introduced, the more phased or iterative approach to Waterfall has been used more frequently too. Have you seen that where Waterfall is not just one single cycle through, but you break the project into smaller units? And
Yes.
if that's the case, would that be considered a hybrid approach, or is that just
Yes.
iterative Waterfall?
Yeah, no, that would be a hybrid because you're starting off with Waterfall, but parts of it can be broken off into Agile. And I have to say that's actually preferred because you kind of get the happiness factor on both ends. It's a win-win situation. The senior level executives who want the project done and are budgeting it out and allocating the resources, but they want a very structured approach. They get the planning and the documentation and everything up front. But when it comes down to getting the work done, you could do it Agile, and then they're happy because not only at the end they get their final result because it's been delivered short term in the middle, they get the final result. They're happy because in Agile with the development, you're getting the feedback, you're making the changes, so the end result is exactly what they wanted. All the changes were made in between, and they got the end result. So it is a hybrid at that point.
Gotcha. Okay. Seems like, you know, some of the disadvantages of Waterfall is managing the schedule because you're trying to get all that scope done and that's going to take longer. So you're doing a lot of balancing work. So you're going to have estimates of how long things are going to take. And so it's a really true balancing act. Whereas Agile, it seems like we have the ability to be more strict with the schedule, saying, you know, like as I mentioned before, we're going to do 5 sprints and then that's it. We'll do as much scope as we can. It seems like if there is some flexibility in the scope, or we have so many product backlog items that some of them are going to be more optional, it seems like Waterfall might fit that well. Do you see that?
Yeah, and it's interesting you said that. I remember working for a big company that's exactly what they did. They wanted all of this, but only could do so much because they said in this time, do as many as you can. And that's what we did. But there's still a bunch left over. So we just left them on a backlog. And at that point, at the end of the project, we said, okay, here's all the stuff that we couldn't get to because they were lower priority. Everybody kept pushing them aside, but do you still want them? And at that point, it becomes a whole nother project then, because I've seen it where they're like, you know what? We do kind of, those were nice to have, but we do kind of really want them in there. So let's, you know, how long would it take you to finish just those last 10 things? And we would create a project. And at that point, it's, you know, again, you could do Agile or Waterfall. It depends on how important they were. But I've actually seen that. It broke down into a second project. Whatever was left kind of hanging out there is the low-hanging fruit on the backlog.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it seems like for organizations that are trying to manage resources, so they've got, you know, like many organizations have lots and lots of projects, but only so many people to work on those projects.
Yes.
So there's like a backlog of projects. So in order to be able to manage their resources of who could be assigned to these projects, that seems like especially if you say we're only going to do 5 sprints, because then you know that in 10 weeks, these resources that are on the project are going to be available for another project. So that seems like one of the strengths of Agile. It might be easier to manage your resources, your resource allocation, as opposed to Waterfall, which you're guessing when the project's going to be done, but those projects frequently go beyond their initial due date.
Yes, that's very true.
Let's see, we'll do one more call for final questions, and I think that will be it. I've run out of my questions. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. There'll be another webinar. If you take a look at that css.edu/professional development and go to webinars, that's where we keep a list of our webinars. And there's several other ones that are going to be coming up over the next couple months. And we've done this for the past 3-4 years. We've done this every spring, and we plan on extending this to do these free webinars more often. So keep an eye out on that webpage, and as we develop new webinars, we'll place them out there. Thanks for coming today, and thank you, Natalie. Thank you for your presentation and sharing with us the different approaches to project management.
You're welcome, and I hope everybody got something out of this. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, bye now.